I'm Charlotte Howell. I'm an associate professor of film and television studies at Boston University, and I'm here to answer some questions from the internet. This is TV History Support. Let's go. Wellness Hippie asks, when did TV become the devil and why? Television has a long history stretching all the way back to the 1960s of being a bad media object. One key moment in that history is in 1961 when Newton Minow, the head of the FCC at the time, said, when television is good, there's nothing better, but it's mired by homogeneity, sameness, consumerism, and violence. TV has become a vast wasteland. And the term vast wasteland has become really closely associated with television ever since. But television, its origins are in radio, not in film. Radio for a long period of time was really well regarded, but also what you listened to when you were doing other things. It was also a domestic medium. It's in your living room. You cannot guarantee the quality or truthfulness necessarily of the messages that are coming through. And so there's a lot of anxiety around television as a new medium. But interestingly, that doesn't really happen until the late 50s and early 60s. There was more and more kind of overt commercialism on TV, which many people point as like the real reason why people talk about TV is the devil. And so that connection with commercialism, the domestic space, and also that television has sometimes kind of been seen as a feminine medium, especially, because of daytime programming and soap operas. All of those things come together for this idea of television as kind of a low art form. Despite various moments of trying to offer technological regulations to help parents determine what programming their children could watch, like the V-chip in the 90s, it is outside influences coming into the home that a lot of parents have historically had some difficulty navigating what kinds of programming to let their children watch. There were, in fact, Senate hearings in the 1960s about violence on TV and how it affects children, in part due to the popularity of Westerns among kids. And so this is a kind of perennial question, but I think it does television dirty because television, like Newton Minow said, when it's good, there's nothing better. Art of the Real asks, what was the first late night type, Tonight Show type show ever? You might think it was The Tonight Show, but in fact, if we look into the archives, we'll find one figure, Faye Emerson. Faye Emerson hosted a nighttime talk show airing at 11 p.m. on CBS. Now, it isn't exactly like a late night talk show as we would see it, but it was an episodic format starting with Faye Emerson coming out in a key outfit, usually with an outrageous hat, doing unscripted interviews with key people.
I didn't do so well with the opening gag.
When your hat fell off. Some of these politicians, stage and screen. There was a real political vibe to the show that would surprise a lot of people, probably. She would read fan mail and then use it to create the topic of the day. This created a real connection between the fans and the hosts. And really, we can see the seeds of that growing into things like celebrities reading mean tweets on contemporary late night talk shows. But Faye Emerson is really where it starts. From Cauliflower Nice. How the hell did we go from 4 to 365 channels? In fact, we've always had more than 4 channels. In many cities, there were local independent TV stations. Many television sets could pick up about 13 channels throughout the mid-century and into the 70s and 80s. And then we have the kind of expansion of broadcast TV with the creation of PBS. In the late 60s, we have the expansion of broadcast in the 80s and 90s with new broadcast networks. But I think what this question is really getting at is how we get to cable television in particular. And cable has this really interesting history where it started off just to retransmit essentially over-the-air broadcast stations to people who are outside of the range of the over-the-air signal of local stations. But this new technology of cable laid in the ground, privately owned, offers an opportunity. And people are ready to jump on an opportunity to make some more money on television outside of networks. But the FCC has purview over cable because they retransmit the over-the-air signals, and they place a couple of limitations on cable. And then HBO comes on the scene in 1975 and sues the FCC, saying these limitations are really hampering our ability to compete. And they win. The limitations are lifted. The courts kind of determine that cable has greater First Amendment right protections than over-the-air broadcasts, which is why you can say various profanities on cable. And then cable really expands. Dozens of channels at first, and then in the 80s and 90s, we have fiber optic cable starting to replace the older system, expanding to hundreds of channels, which is where we are today. Executor of Judgment asks, anybody else disappointed with their families after growing up with the 90s family sitcoms and getting unrealistic expectations from those shows? The TGIF Friday night block on ABC from the late 80s all the way through to the early 2000s were really family-oriented shows. The TGIF block was very wholesome because ABC was owned by Disney. And so these families were meant to be idealistic. They were there to kind of sell you on this vision of the family, even if it looks different than the nuclear families of the 1950s. They fit as well the changing kind of demographics and norms of representing families on TV. So we get a lot more Black cast sitcoms like Family Matters, like Sister Sister. We have more blended families like Step by Step, so kind of divorced or widowed families coming together. But what we see now is that it wasn't standing out, it was more expected, as well as kind of the gender representation shifting where a lot of these moms are working moms. And so we have television in many cases reacting to changing social norms and then suddenly reflecting that because it wants to speak to people who want to see themselves on TV, even if it's through a kind of like a rose-tinted view. From the television subreddit, what's the most egregious snub in Emmy's history? A snub means that it's expected to get nominated or to win. That expectation is built through critical consensus, and then oftentimes it's more of a retrospective, where some show continues to gain prominence and praise, and the shows that beat it get a little bit lost in history. So people point to The Wire being only nominated for writing categories and not winning as one of the key snubs. Personally, I'm always surprised Battlestar Galactica didn't actually get much Emmy love, especially given its allegorical connection to the politics of the time. But that's the point of the snub. It is that critical consensus that really we see driven in many ways by the rise of television criticism from the 80s forward. Camball 1998 asks, was I Love Lucy the first big hit scripted TV show? I Love Lucy was innovative in a key number of ways. In particular, Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz created the production company Desilu, and they conceived of I Love Lucy as a television adaptation from the radio show that Lucy was a star of. But the thing was, the network, CBS, wanted to shoot in New York. Desi had a job in Los Angeles. So they said, we will figure out a way to shoot it in Los Angeles. They acquired soundstage, worked with Carl Freund, who was a key director and cinematographer from Hollywood Film Productions, hired Jess Oppenheimer as one of the first head writer / executive producer positions, and created I Love Lucy that would be shot with a 3-camera setup and shot on film. Many scripted shows before I Love Lucy were either aired live, and the only version we have of them are kinescopes. I Love Lucy determined they were going to use high-quality film stock. CBS was like, this is too expensive. So Lucy and Desi and Desilu Productions basically said, we'll cut out some of our salary for an ownership stake in the show. Key decision. This was the seed of a lot of where we are in the media industries today. By thinking about this as not just as it airs as live broadcast, but thinking about it as a show that could be preserved and then sold later on. We get this idea of television being valuable not just when it airs, but also for rewatching or re-airing, really from I Love Lucy. That's also why it's more prominent in our cultural memory. And because I Love Lucy was such an investment, it was a big hit. From the history subreddit, when did television with programming actually start? Television as a technology actually started in the 20s and 30s. So there are a couple of TV stations as early as the 1930s. But the 1939 World's Fair television was presented by RCA as coming soon to your living room and promising programming to come soon as well. Of course, World War II interrupted this development and manufacturing was needed for other means. So when the war ends, 1945, we have this battle of what television could be. RCA said, we need to go TV now and black and white because that's the technology we have ready to go for manufacturing. Westinghouse said, but we're close to color. We could potentially have more channels. And the FCC in 1945 sided with RCA and basically adopted their TV Now plan. So we actually see a lot of wrestling and boxing, and pretty much only at nighttime. It's not until about 1948, 49 that we really start to see television programming as we know it. Studio One on CBS, a live anthology program, basically a play a week, starts in 1948. The Goldbergs, a sitcom as we'd recognize it today, starts in 1949. Daytime doesn't really become a factor until the early and mid 1950s, as we get the Today Show starting in the early 1950s and then expanding the daytime schedule from there. But in general, late 1940s is when TV programming actually starts. Let Bugs Live 2 asks, what makes Star Trek Star Trek? Star Trek is an incredibly successful TV franchise. Part of what makes Star Trek is this idealized future that sometimes is called a kind of liberal humanist future, where so many of the struggles we encounter today, we have found a way past them. And so it's a way to allegorically engage with political issues at a bit of a distance. It tells compelling stories. You know you're going to get a conclusion by the end of the episode. But Star Trek really is Star Trek because of its fans. The Star Trek fandom, one, created a letter writing campaign that helped to ensure that the series originally in the 1960s could get a third season to be then syndicated in reruns so that it could keep being a part of the television schedule even after it ended in 1969. They created fan conventions, fanzines, kept a lot of the actors when they were out of work after the series in kind of decent money standards by paying for their appearances at conventions. And so it built a really strong connection between the franchise and the fans that I think really makes Star Trek stand out as a TV franchise. Low Airport 397 asks, what TV shows do you think made an impact on society? The thing about television is that it and social change are always in this dance with each other. So we have this kind of like increased movement of counterculture, protests, shifts of the generation in the 1960s, and we don't really see that reflected on network television until the 1970s. Maude showed the first time a main character has an abortion even before Roe versus Wade was decided.
I don't understand your hesitancy. When they made it a law, you were for it.
Of course, I wasn't pregnant then.
These shows were all about bringing the explicit political discussions of the 1970s into the comedic situation and really getting at some of that reality. Television brings a sense of simultaneity into the living room. And so we see that with the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War as well, where these stories of these struggles and the inequalities are in your living room, and you can't really ignore it when it's there regularly on the nightly news. You could also look at the 90s with Ellen coming out on her sitcom,
Susan, I'm gay.
as really normalizing a particular type of queer representation, but absolutely bringing conscientiousness into living rooms of a lot of people who maybe hadn't encountered a lot of gay people in their lives before then. Fossils222 asks, what happened to Discovery, History, I think that means TLC, and other educational channels? It's 99% reality TV. Discovery, History, The Learning Channel, these are cable channels that at various points were more oriented towards education and have since become more oriented towards entertainment. But there's one cable channel that's not featured in here because it's become so associated with reality TV that we forget it was once a more educational and high-end channel, and that's Bravo. Bravo started out as international, independent films and performances and operas and the like, and then it was bought by NBC and started to shift. Queer Eye for the Straight Guy hit, and then we get Project Runway, Top Chef, and the first of the Real Housewives franchise. And now we think of Bravo as the home for reality TV and reality TV franchises. But I want to talk also about reality TV. Reality TV has its origins not on network TV. The PBS docuseries An American Family in the 1970s followed the Loud family. It was meant to be a fly on the wall kind of documentary TV series, but there was a lot of drama that happened with their divorce. The son came out as gay. We see a lot of the seeds of reality TV, but MTV really set a lot of the standards of kind of exaggerated editing, emphasized conflict with the real world that premiered in the 1990s. And then we get reality TV as we understand it, and that high melodrama, high conflict, really entertaining reality TV show hit with Survivor on CBS in 2000. That's also why we see it coming up everywhere on cable, because reality TV is much cheaper to produce than scripted TV. A question from Cora. How did life change when the television was first released? Television took quite a while to become heavily adopted, but it really was building on some changes that had already started in radio, of setting a clear schedule. But now you had to sit and watch it in what was increasingly designated rooms in homes for the television set. So it changed architecture, creating the den. It changed some habits, like we have to eat dinner before our show comes on, but also the new industry of the TV dinner. So you could watch television and eat dinner together. There was a lot of anxiety about how much TV children were watching, but that's true of pretty much, comic books, video games, rap music, whatever. But in general, those were some of the key changes. From Ellie Kichi on Reddit. I'm a wealthy American early adopter of TV in the 1940s. What's on? Well, it depends on what time in the 1940s you're talking about. If it's like 1946 or 47, you'd pretty much have to be in New York, maybe DC, maybe Philadelphia to even get a TV signal. You're still mainly getting primetime programming, but there were actually a lot of ethnic, immigrant, and Black-led sitcoms in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Life with Luigi about an Italian immigrant in Chicago. The Goldbergs about a Jewish American family in the Bronx. That started in 1949. I Love Lucy, a white woman and a Cuban man in a relationship. This was a time that was speaking directly to urban audiences who were generally understood to be multicultural. You also have live anthology drama series, which are really well regarded. This is where screenwriters who maybe had been playwrights before really got their start. They wrote plays for television to be broadcast live. You have 12 Angry Men, which started on television and then was turned into a play and then was turned into an Oscar-winning film. And you have live programming, variety shows, some sports, but it's mostly wrestling, boxing, indoor, because baseball stadiums didn't all have lights at that time. So you have a real mix, but it is a lot of live programming. Gummy Worm Guy asks, which shows represent the modern golden age of television? Well, the idea of a golden age really is about kind of critical consensus. In fact, many of the shows considered and praised for golden ages or as quality television don't have a lot of viewers, but they have the right viewers. According to advertisers, sometimes subscribers, a lot of people would point at the start being The Sopranos in 1999. HBO tends to be where people point to the start of what is considered by critics, by awards granting industries, by a lot of kind of the general public as the golden age. The end point probably ends around the time that Breaking Bad ends, because soon thereafter we enter a period of peak TV, where more and more television gets made, but just don't get the noise and attention and eyeballs. A golden age, it's about differentiation from what is considered the norm of television. And so if we look at this modern golden age from, say, The Sopranos to Breaking Bad, including kind of the usual suspects, Mad Men, maybe Game of Thrones, Dexter on Showtime, a lot of shows that feature male anti-heroes, a lot of pushing the boundaries and the edginess of TV, and really reacting to what was very popular on broadcast TV at the time. So a golden age often is only golden because it's burnished by the perceived lack of shine of some of what is considered regular TV. Duckap's World asks, what 5 to 10 shows revolutionized TV and why? Dallas and General Hospital in the 80s are a combo deal. The rise of the soap opera is so important to how we get more widespread serial dramas and television production these days. We don't get Grey's Anatomy without Dallas. Julia, 1968, starring Diane Carroll, a complicated but really big leap forward in terms of representation of Black women on TV. A middle-class Black woman raising her son. It was really about modeling a kind of a civil rights figure and bringing a different type of Black representation to American homes. On the Family, discussions of abortion, homosexuality, trans characters, women's rights, all of these different topics featured very prominently in one of the most popular shows of that time. And we don't get Cartman on South Park without Archie Bunker and his bigotry on All in the Family. Shuffleupagus asks, how the F did TV work before digital? Essentially, television before the digital transition was over-the-air analog signal broadcast. A local station would create a carrier signal to bring the signal that contained the audio and visual components to everybody's antenna within reach. And then the antenna would gather the signal and translate it into audio and image format. This is why you could have travel TVs in the 1960s. If it had an antenna and a battery pack, you could watch TV anywhere. Rihanna's Side Dude asks, how was South Park even approved? This show got Family Guy, American Dad, and The Simpsons beat. South Park in the 90s started out as an experimental short film that went kind of proto-viral online.
Christmas is about something much more important. What? Presents.
Trey Parker and Matt Stone decided to develop it as a TV show. And eventually that show landed at Comedy Central. It's a cable channel, so it has more First Amendment protections and more protections about vulgarity and profanity, which of course this show revels in portraying.
How would you like to go see the school counselor?
How would you like to suck my balls?
South Park got written up in the New York Times multiple times. The controversy was good publicity in a lot of ways, and it has continued to be, South Park, a key example of the kind of brand that Comedy Central was and that now kind of can be integrated into various streaming platforms. Woofle124 asks, explain it like I'm 5. How did black and white TV turn to color? Television could have always been in color. And there have been TV shows shot in color since the early 1950s. As long as people were still buying black and white television sets, there was no incentive to transfer to color. NBC really starts experimenting with some color broadcasts, mainly of one-off spectacles. So the Rose Parade, broadcast in color, the 1955 production of Peter Pan on NBC. And then it's really when we get to the kind of mid-1960s where we start to see multiple nights of programs in color. We move into essentially a color mandate of broadcast, and you could only see these fabulous colors if you had a brand new colored television set. Anytime we have new media technology. The whole reason to get people to buy it is to have programming on it that they can only watch or engage with on that. It's the same logic we see of streamers with exclusive TV options nowadays. It was you want to be able to see these shows in color, so you will buy a new TV set. And oh, by the way, Westinghouse, RCA, all of these throughout TV history have a long history of investment in television networks, and so they can kind of drive the production cycle somewhat as well. Our Mega asks, what exactly is a syndicated TV show? Syndicated just means a company that sells directly to local stations. Now, you've seen your local station probably show local news. That's one way to fill in time. But on weekends, afternoons, what we often see is syndicated shows. Either second-run syndication, what we would call reruns, or it's a first-run syndicated show. Bypasses the network entirely, sells directly on off-network scheduled time slots to the local station. Baywatch started one season on NBC. NBC decided not to go forward with it. Its producer decided to keep making it and try in syndication. Incredibly successful. Xena Warrior Princess and Star Trek The Next Generation. Natalie2727 asks, why do you think Westerns were so popular on TV in the 1950s? The decline of the Hollywood film Western is one of the main reasons. They weren't producing the same amount of films that they had during the 1930s to 1950s. Meanwhile, television has moved out to Los Angeles and realized that there are all of these resources put in place in making dozens of Westerns a year. So you have experts in horse training, stunt people, you have the sets and the ghost towns. There's also a social reason, right? The 1950s is a time of some dramatic shifts in terms of gender roles. The move to white-collar work was really kind of destabilizing for these ideas of masculinity. And the Western has always been a text about masculinity, a frontier masculinity. And that, I think, was also really, really resonant for the 1950s. From Just Day 1788. Does anyone else feel like network TV really just gave up after the rise of streaming? There's this assumed differentiation between the networks and streaming. But in a lot of cases, the networks and streaming services are owned by the same conglomerate parent company. Now, I think what this is really addressing is the feeling that a lot of emphasis now from production companies, from the major studios, is on streaming. And I think that's true. That's the audience they're chasing. Network TV, as some executives have described it, is essentially one shelf for a TV show to wait to be licensed for streaming services and to build an audience to make that deal sweeter. But always remember, it's a couple of companies that basically control everything. Sick Thighs asks, is public access still a thing? Could I watch a public access channel on my TV right now if I wanted to? If you have cable, probably. Public access really rose to prominence around cable because cable providers were required to carry local public education and governmental channels. And some of them, at early points, actually provided studio space, camera equipment, support for public access programming. In New York in the 1970s, there was avant-garde, like man sits in a bathtub for a half an hour programs on the local cable access channel. There were forums of lesbian groups, punk shows. Public access is the promise of television that's more democratic, more local. But as with many things, it's largely gone away because it's too expensive. Much of what would be on public access has moved in the last 15 years to YouTube. Snowy Eclipse 01 asks, why did old television stations sign off after dark? They didn't have any more programming left. We don't get 24-hour programming really until cable. CNN is one of the kind of early let's program for 24 hours, mainly because they had to hit a wide variety of time zones. And cable channels really had to do that, whereas local TV stations only had to reach their local TV audience. The network wasn't providing content after late night, and it was too expensive to run and maintain the local station and pay for programming. So they signed off, and that was it. That's everything for today. I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching TV History Support. Catch you next time.